Human Janitor shared his last food with a maid, unaware she was the alien queen in disguise. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The night shift at Galactic Embassy Station 47 was as lonely as it was vast. Miles Harper pushed his cleaning cart through the gleaming hallways, the wheels squeaking against the polished floor, a sound that had become his only companion in the endless hours of darkness. The emergency lights had been blinking red for the past 27 hours. A diplomatic crisis had erupted between the Zentari Federation and the Human Alliance, prompting most of the station's personnel to evacuate to safer locations. Only essential staff remained, and apparently, that included janitors. Miles had been explicitly ordered to stay and maintain cleanliness protocols in the central sectors, critical for the life support systems to function optimally, they said. But he knew the truth. He was forgotten, deemed expendable in the chaos of emergency protocols. His stomach growled loudly in the empty corridor. Food supplies were running critically low across the station since the supply ships had been diverted. Miles had one nutrition bar left in his pocket, his last meal for who knew how long. The thought made his mouth dry, but he continued his work, diligently cleaning the emblems of a dozen alien civilizations embedded in the floor. As he rounded the corner toward the Zentari diplomatic wing, a soft sound stopped him. It was almost like a whimper coming from behind one of the maintenance panels. Miles paused, his mop suspended mid-swipe. The sound came again, slightly louder this time. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Is someone there?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, the panel shifted slightly, and a slender figure emerged from the narrow service tunnel. Miles instinctively stepped back, his grip tightening on the mop handle. The figure straightened up, revealing what appeared to be a woman in a gray service uniform similar to his own, though hers bore no station insignia or identification markers. Her skin had a subtle bluish tint that caught the emergency lights, and her eyes, large, luminous, with vertical pupils, darted nervously from side to side. Her hair was stark white, cropped short against her skull, and her ears tapered to slight points. "You are human maintenance staff?" she asked, her voice carrying a musical lilt that didn't match any Earth accent Miles had ever heard. "I'm the janitor." "Yeah," Miles replied, lowering his mop. He noticed the grime on her uniform and the exhaustion in her stance. "Are you okay? What were you doing in there?" The woman hesitated, then gestured vaguely at the panel. "I am hiding. I am also maintenance. For Zentari delegation." She looked down at her uniform self-consciously. "What you call Maid?" Miles frowned. The Zentari were notoriously private about their personal spaces, and he'd never seen any of their service staff before. But with the evacuation, strange things were happening all over the station. "Why are you hiding?" he asked, glancing down the corridor. "Did something happen?" Her shoulders tensed. Conflict came suddenly. No time to evacuate with others. "I was left behind." She hugged herself, a surprisingly human gesture. No food for 2 days. Life support in Zentari wing failing. Miles felt a pang of sympathy. Being forgotten was something he understood all too well. He was just a janitor, invisible to the diplomats and officers who ran the station. This woman, alien or not, was in the same position. "What's your name?" he asked, offering a gentle smile. "Lyra," she stammered, clearly unused to the question. "I'm Miles." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his last nutrition bar. Without a second thought, he broke it in half and extended the larger portion to her. "Here. It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Lyra stared at the offered food, her large eyes widening further. She reached out with slender, six-fingered hands, hesitating just before taking it. "This is your last food." Miles shrugged. "There's got to be more somewhere on this station. We'll find it together." He wasn't actually sure of that, but the thought of hoarding his last bit of food while she starved didn't sit right with him. Lyra took the nutrition bar half, holding it as if it were made of precious crystal. "Why would you share with me? I am not human. Not your responsibility." "Because you're hungry," Miles said simply. And because being alone during all this is worse than being hungry. For a long moment, Lyra just stared at him, her alien features unreadable. Then she carefully took a small bite of the nutrition bar. Her expression shifted through several emotions Miles couldn't interpret before settling on what seemed like wonder. Simple kindness, she whispered, almost to herself. Without expectation of return, Miles felt oddly embarrassed by her intensity. It's just a nutrition bar, he said, taking a bite of his own half. Not like I gave you the keys to Earth or anything. A strange sound emanated from her, a trilling vibration that Miles eventually recognized as laughter. Perhaps you have given more than you know, Miles Harper. Miles blinked. I don't think I told you my last name. The emergency lights suddenly shifted from red to deep purple, a color sequence Miles had never seen before. A mechanical voice echoed through the station. Attention. Centauri royal vessel approaching. All personnel maintain lockdown protocols. Lyra's posture changed instantly. She straightened, her movements becoming more fluid and precise. We must move quickly. There is little time. Time for what? Miles asked, confused by her sudden transformation. What's going on? The Centauri fleet comes not for peace but conquest, Lyra said, her voice taking on a new authority. I have seen their war plans. This diplomatic crisis was manufactured to empty the station of witnesses. Miles felt his heart rate spike. How do you know this? Who are you really? Lyra fixed him with her strange eyes. I am not what I appear to be, Miles Harper. But your kindness has complicated matters. She glanced down the corridor. Come with me. I can get us to safety, but we must move now. Before Miles could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the station. The floor beneath them shuddered violently, and the lights flickered before stabilizing again. In the distance, alarm klaxons began to wail. Too late, Lyra murmured. They've breached the main docking bay. She grabbed Miles by the arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Your cleaning cart, does it have access to maintenance tunnels throughout the station? Miles nodded, still trying to process what was happening. Yeah, my access card opens all the service hatches. Then we still have a chance. Lyra pulled him toward his abandoned cart. I need to reach the communications hub. If I can send a message to my people. Your people? Miles interrupted. I thought you said you were with the Centauri. Lyra gave him a look that somehow managed to be both apologetic and determined. I said I was maintenance for the Centauri delegation. I never claimed to be one of them. She reached up and touched something at her temple. The air around her face seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from hot pavement. Her features subtly shifted, her eyes growing slightly larger, her skin taking on a more pronounced blue hue, and intricate patterns becoming visible beneath the surface of her skin, glowing faintly in the dim emergency lighting. I am Lyrathel, first scout of the Eldrani Conclave, she said, her voice now carrying a resonant quality it hadn't before. My people have been monitoring the Centauri's expansion into this sector. I was sent to gather intelligence on their intentions toward Earth and its colonies. Miles felt like the floor had dropped out from under him again, and this time it wasn't from an explosion. You're a spy? I am a guardian, she corrected. The Eldrani have watched over emerging species for millennia. We intervene only when necessary, when a young race faces extinction at the hands of conquerors. Another explosion shook the station, closer this time. The lights flickered more severely. Like now, Miles said, understanding dawning. They're going to use this station as a staging ground for an attack on Earth, aren't they? Lyrathel nodded grimly. Precisely. The Centauri believe humans are too fractious and technologically inferior to pose any real threat. They plan to establish a foothold here, then launch a full invasion within your solar year. Miles pushed his cart toward the nearest maintenance hatch. Then let's get you to the communications hub. You can warn your people, and they can warn Earth. Lyrathel placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. Miles, there's something you should know. She hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. The reason I was hiding in that service tunnel was not just to avoid detection by the Centauri. I was recovering. Recovering from what? A neural interface overload. When the Centauri realized a spy was aboard, They initiated a station-wide scan calibrated to detect Eldrani physiology. I had to disconnect from my neural network to avoid detection, which is painful and disorienting for my kind. I haven't been able to contact my people for nearly 50 hours. Miles processed this information. So that's why you were so hungry? The disconnect took a lot out of you. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Yes, our neural connections sustain us nearly as much as food. Being cut off is like slowly suffocating. And I gave you half a nutrition bar, Miles said with a short, nervous laugh. Not exactly a royal feast. Lirathel's expression grew solemn. It was an act of kindness that no Zentari would have offered. They view service castes as disposable resources. What you did, sharing your last food with someone you believe to be a mere maid. It speaks to why your species deserves protection. The station rocked with another impact, this one violent enough to throw them both against the wall. The lights went out completely for 3 seconds before the emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in a faint blue glow. We need to move, Miles said, swiping his access card at the maintenance hatch. The panel slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a narrow tunnel lit by strip lighting. The communications hub is 4 levels up, but these tunnels can get us there without using the main corridors. Lirathel nodded and followed him into the tunnel. As the hatch sealed behind them, Miles couldn't help but ask the question that had been buzzing in his mind since her revelation. So if you're a first scout, that must be pretty important, right? Like high ranking. Lirathel's luminous eyes met his in the dim light of the tunnel. Among my people, it is a position of some significance, yes. Miles crawled forward, leading the way through the cramped space. But why would they send someone important on such a dangerous mission? Seems like a job for, I don't know, regular spies or something. For several moments, Lirathel was silent as they navigated a junction in the tunnel system. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, as if carefully choosing her words. The Eldrani value first-hand experience. Our leaders must understand the situations they manage. It is difficult to explain in human terms. The closest concept might be leading from the front. Miles nodded as he helped her up a narrow ladder to the next level. So you're like a captain or a colonel or something, getting your hands dirty with the troops. Again, that musical trilling laughter. Something like that, yes. They continued in silence for several minutes, making their way through the maze of maintenance tunnels. The sounds of combat grew more distant, which Miles took as a good sign. The Zentari forces must be concentrating their attack on the main docking areas and command centers, not the utility sections. As they climbed another ladder, Miles noticed Lirathel was moving with increasing difficulty, her breathing becoming labored. "Are you okay?" he asked, pausing to look down at her. The neural disconnection, she managed between breaths. "Without my connection to the network, my body is struggling to maintain optimal function." Miles frowned with concern. "We're almost there. Just one more level." They emerged into a larger maintenance junction, where several tunnels converged. Miles helped Lirathel sit against the wall, noticing the faint glow beneath her skin had dimmed considerably. "What can I do?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Lirathel reached out and touched his hand. "There is something, but it requires trust. I need to establish a temporary neural link with you. It will not harm you, but it will allow me to draw enough stability to continue." Miles hesitated only briefly. "Will it hurt?" A weak smile. "Not for you. For me, it will be unpleasant but necessary. Your neural patterns are not compatible with mine, but they can provide a framework that will help me stabilize." "Then do it," Miles said firmly. "We don't have time to waste." Lirathel nodded gratefully and placed her hands on either side of his face. "Close your eyes and try to clear your mind." Miles did as instructed, feeling slightly foolish sitting in a maintenance junction with an alien's hands on his face. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then he felt a strange warmth spreading from where her fingers touched his temples, flowing into his mind like honey poured into water. It wasn't invasive or painful, more like the feeling of slipping into a warm bath after a long, cold day. He felt a presence that was distinctly not his own, but it moved respectfully within the boundaries of his consciousness, not pushing or prying. Then, abruptly, he felt something else, a flash of memories not his own. A vast chamber filled with beings of blue-tinted skin and glowing patterns. A ceremony of some kind. Voices raised in a harmonic chant that made his heart ache with its beauty. And a sense of terrible responsibility, of decisions that would affect billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. The connection broke suddenly, and Miles gasped as he opened his eyes. Lirithel was staring at him with an expression of shock. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't intend to share memories." The connection was stronger than I anticipated. Miles blinked, trying to process what he'd experienced. Those weren't just any memories, were they? That was some kind of coronation or something. Lirithel looked away. "We should continue. The communications hub is close." "Wait." Miles caught her arm as she started to rise. "Just how high-ranking are you exactly?" She met his gaze reluctantly. "The term First Scout is somewhat metaphorical in translation. What does it really mean, then?" Lirithel sighed, a surprisingly human sound. "In your terms, the closest approximation would be Queen." Miles stared at her, his mind struggling to process this revelation. "You're the queen of your entire species? And you're crawling through maintenance tunnels with a janitor?" "I am Lirithel, High Sovereign of the Eldrani Conclave, Guardian of the 17 Systems, and Protector of Emerging Civilizations," she confirmed, a note of dignity entering her voice despite their surroundings. "And yes, I am crawling through maintenance tunnels with a janitor who shared his last food with someone he believed to be nothing more than a maid." Miles sat back on his heels, momentarily stunned into silence. "But why you? Why not send someone else?" "Because this mission was too important to delegate," Lirithel said simply. "The Zentari expansion threatens not just humanity, but the balance of power in this entire sector. And because our most sacred law requires that those who would protect must first understand. I could not decide the fate of your species without seeing humanity with my own eyes." Another explosion rocked the station, this one close enough to send dust raining down from the tunnel ceiling. "And what did you see?" Miles asked, helping her to her feet. Lirithel's luminous eyes held his. "I saw a species capable of great compassion, one that recognizes dignity in all beings, regardless of status. One worth protecting." She smiled faintly. "Even if my conclusion is based on a sample size of one janitor." Miles felt his face grow warm. "I'm nothing special. Anyone would have done the same." "That is where you are wrong," Lirithel said. "In my time observing the station, I have seen diplomats from a dozen worlds step over fallen service workers without a glance. I have seen military officers from your own species treat support staff as furniture. What you did, sharing your last food with someone you thought was beneath your notice, that is remarkable." Before Miles could respond, a violent tremor shook the tunnel, nearly throwing them both off their feet. Warning lights began flashing along the tunnel walls. "Critical structural damage detected," announced the station's AI. "Section 12B decompression imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." "That's right above the communications hub," Miles said, his heart sinking. "They must be targeting critical systems." Lirithel's expression hardened with determination. "Then we need an alternative. Does this station have backup communication arrays?" Miles thought quickly. "Yes, in the emergency evacuation pods. They're designed to broadcast distress signals on all frequencies." "Can they be modified to send a targeted transmission on a specific frequency?" "Maybe, if you know what you're doing. I'm just a janitor, not a communications specialist." Lirithel's skin patterns pulsed with renewed intensity. "I know what I'm doing. Take me to the nearest evacuation pod." Miles nodded and led the way down a different tunnel branch. They moved as quickly as they could through the cramped space, the sounds of destruction growing louder around them. After several minutes of crawling and climbing, they reached a maintenance access panel that, according to the markings, opened into Evacuation Bay 7. Miles pressed his ear against the panel, listening for any signs of Zentari forces on the other side. Hearing nothing but the distant alarms, he carefully pushed the panel open and peered out. The evacuation bay was deserted, its rows of escape pods still secured in their docking clamps. The room showed signs of a hasty evacuation, scattered personal items, a dropped datapad, a single shoe lying on its side. "Clear," Miles whispered, sliding out of the tunnel and helping Lirathel through. They moved quickly across the bay to the nearest evacuation pod. Miles swiped his access card, and the pod's hatch slid open with a pneumatic hiss. They climbed inside, and Lirathel immediately went to the communications console. "This is fortunate," she said, examining the controls. "This model has more advanced communication capabilities than I expected." Miles secured the hatch behind them and moved to her side. "What are you going to do?" "Modify the distress beacon to transmit on an Eldrani emergency frequency," Lirathel explained, her six-fingered hands moving deftly over the console. "My people maintain constant monitoring of these channels. Once they receive my authentication code, they'll send assistance immediately." As she worked, Miles kept watch through the pod's viewport. The evacuation bay remained empty, but he could see flashes of weapons fire through the distant windows that looked out into space. Zentari ships were engaging the station's automated defense systems, their sleek, predatory vessels darting around the larger human-built structures. "How long will it take your people to get here?" he asked. "An Eldrani response vessel is already in this system, maintaining stealth observation," Lirathel replied without looking up from her work. "Once they receive my signal, they should arrive within 30 minutes. Miles glanced at the battle outside. "I'm not sure this station has 30 minutes. Then we must buy time." Lirathel finished her modifications and activated the transmitter. A series of lights on the console blinked from red to green. "Signal away. Now we need to prevent the Zentari from gaining complete control of the station before help arrives." "And how do we do that?" Miles asked. "I'm a janitor with a mop. And well, you're a queen without her army." Lirathel turned to face him, her expression resolute. "The Zentari believe they are dealing with an empty station and a few stranded humans. They do not know I am here, and they do not know what a human janitor is capable of." Miles couldn't help but laugh. "I'm pretty sure they're right about the janitor part." "Are they?" Lirathel asked, her head tilting slightly. "You know the station better than anyone. You know its systems, its weaknesses, its hidden places. That knowledge is power, Miles Harper." Miles considered her words. It was true that he'd spent years crawling through every maintenance tunnel, fixing minor issues that the engineers couldn't be bothered with, learning the station's quirks and secrets. "I might know a few things we could try," he admitted. "The environmental systems can be manipulated from maintenance access points. We could flood sections with suppressant foam or alter the atmospheric mix to non-lethal but disorienting levels." Lirathel nodded approvingly. "What else?" "The cargo loading mechanisms in the lower levels could be overridden to create barriers or distractions. And there's a network of maintenance drones that could be reprogrammed to interfere with their communications." "Perfect." Lirathel's skin patterns glowed brighter with what Miles was beginning to recognize as excitement. "We don't need to defeat them. Just slow them down and confuse them long enough for my people to arrive." Miles felt a surge of determination. It was strange. He'd spent years feeling invisible on this station, just a background figure that kept things clean while the important people made decisions. Now, suddenly, he was planning guerrilla tactics with an alien queen to save humanity from invasion. "I'll need to access the main environmental control junction," he said, moving toward the hatch. "It's 2 levels down, near the central hub." Lirathel placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Before we go, there's something you should know." Her expression became solemn. "The Zentari will show no mercy if they capture us. Particularly you." "Me? I'm nobody. You are a human who has aided the High Sovereign of the Eldrani. In their eyes, that makes you a priority target." She hesitated, then continued. "If we are separated, do not tell them anything about me or what we've done. They have methods of extraction that are extremely unpleasant." Miles swallowed hard but nodded. "I understand." He tried for a light tone. "So I'm aiding and abetting alien royalty now? That's got to violate some part of my employment contract." Lirithel's serious expression cracked into a smile. I believe I can arrange a diplomatic immunity exception. With renewed purpose, they exited the evacuation pod and made their way to the access tunnel once more. As they crawled through the narrow space, Miles couldn't help but reflect on how quickly his life had changed. Just hours ago, he'd been an overlooked janitor, pushing his cart through empty corridors. Now he was Earth's unlikely defender, armed with nothing but his access card and intimate knowledge of the station's maintenance systems. And beside him crawled the queen of an advanced alien civilization, disguised as a maid, who had seen something worth saving in humanity because a janitor had shared his last meal with someone he thought was just like him, forgotten and alone in a crisis. As they reached the junction that would take them down to the environmental controls, Miles realized with sudden clarity that this was what humans had always done best: adapt, improvise, and find allies in the most unexpected places. The Zentari might have technology and numbers on their side, but they were about to learn a harsh lesson about underestimating both humanity and the power of simple kindness. The station trembled around them as another impact struck somewhere above. Miles led the way down the access ladder, his mind already racing with plans. They had work to do, and not much time to do it. But for the first time since the crisis began, he felt something like hope. The fate of Earth might just rest in the hands of a janitor and a queen. And somehow, that seemed fitting. The environmental control junction was a cramped space filled with pipes, conduits, and control panels. Miles quickly oriented himself among the familiar systems, his hands moving with practiced efficiency over the controls. I can redirect the atmospheric mix in sections B through F, he explained as he worked. It won't hurt the Zentari, but high concentrations of nitrogen will make them sluggish and disoriented. Lirithel watched him with undisguised fascination. You understand these systems well for a janitor. Miles shrugged as he carefully adjusted the settings. When you spend years cleaning around something, you get curious about how it works. Engineers are usually happy to explain if you ask, makes them feel important. Plus, I've had to do emergency fixes when they were too busy with real problems. Your adaptability is remarkable, Lirithel observed. Most species specialize rigidly. A cleaner would never learn engineering skills. Humans don't really work that way, Miles replied, finalizing the atmospheric adjustments. We're more flexible. A sudden transmission blared over the station's emergency channel. Attention human survivors. This is Commander Varric of the Zentari Dominion. Your station is now under our control. Surrender immediately, and you will be treated according to interstellar conventions for prisoners of war. Resist, and you will be eliminated. You have 10 minutes to comply. Miles glanced at Lirithel. Friendly bunch, aren't they? The Zentari do not understand the concept of friendly, she replied grimly. Only useful or useless. Well, let's make ourselves useful then. Miles moved to another panel. I can activate the cargo loading systems from here. Create some chaos. He pulled up the control interface and began rerouting commands, sending the massive robotic loading arms into unpredictable movements throughout the cargo base. On a secondary screen, they watched as the mechanical arms began swinging wildly, knocking over equipment and forcing the Zentari soldiers to scatter for cover. That should keep them busy for a few minutes, Miles said with satisfaction. Next, let's give them something else to worry about. He moved to the maintenance drone controls and quickly bypassed the security protocols, another trick he'd learned during long night shifts. Within moments, he had reprogrammed 24 cleaning and repair drones to move erratically through the corridors, emitting high-pitched sounds and flashing lights. The drones won't hurt anyone, but they'll be annoying as hell and mess with their sensor readings, Miles explained. Like trying to have a serious conversation while a bunch of Roombas are bumping into your ankles. Lirithel smiled at the analogy. Impressive. You're turning the station itself against them. Just buying time, Miles said, though he couldn't help feeling a surge of pride at her approval. How long until your people get here? Lirithel checked a small device she'd produced from somewhere in her uniform. The signal was received. 22 minutes until arrival. Then we need to do more. Miles thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. The fire suppression system. We can flood entire sections with retardant foam. It's non-toxic, but impossible to see through and really slippery. Before he could implement this plan, the junction door suddenly shuddered under a heavy impact. Metal groaned as something powerful struck it again. "They've found us," Lyrithel said, her skin patterns pulsing with alarm. Miles quickly closed the control interfaces and looked around for another exit. "There's an access panel behind that conduit rack. We can get to the maintenance tunnels from there." They scrambled toward the hidden exit as the door buckled under another blow. Miles pushed aside the conduit rack and revealed the small maintenance hatch. He quickly swiped his access card and pulled the panel open. "You first," he urged Lyrithel. Just as she was climbing into the tunnel, the junction door finally gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Two Zentari soldiers burst into the room, their armor gleaming under the emergency lights, weapons raised. "Go!" Miles shouted, shoving Lyrithel fully into the tunnel. He slammed his hand against the emergency override, and the panel slid shut just as the soldiers opened fire. Energy blasts scorched the wall where the panel had been seconds before. Miles raised his hand slowly, turning to face the Zentari. They were tall, muscular humanoids with ridged gray skin and eyes that glowed a malevolent yellow. Their armor was sleek and functional, covered in what looked like weapon attachments and sensor arrays. "Just a janitor," Miles said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was trying to fix the environmental systems." One of the soldiers stepped forward, scanning Miles with a handheld device. "Human life sign confirmed." Unarmed, the soldier's voice had a metallic quality, filtered through a translator. "Where are the others?" "There are no others," Miles replied truthfully. "Everyone evacuated. They left me behind to maintain critical systems." The second soldier was examining the control panels. He has been manipulating station functions. Environmental controls, cargo systems, maintenance drones. The first soldier grabbed Miles roughly by the arm. "You will deactivate all countermeasures immediately." Miles nodded submissively. "Of course. No problem." As he was marched to the control panel, he surreptitiously glanced at the small device on his wrist, the station maintenance staff's timekeeper. 18 minutes until the Eldrani arrived. He needed to stall. "These systems are pretty complicated," Miles said, deliberately fumbling with the controls. "I'm not really trained on these. I just know the basics." "Work faster," the soldier growled, pushing the barrel of his weapon against Miles's ribs. Miles winced and continued his charade of incompetence, making small adjustments that looked important but actually did nothing. "The system's pretty locked up. Might take a while to reset everything." The second soldier was now examining the maintenance hatch. "There are signs of recent access. Someone else was here." The first soldier tightened his grip on Miles's arm. "Who else is on this station? Where did they go?" "I told you. I'm alone," Miles insisted. "I've been using the maintenance tunnels to move around safely." The soldier's glowing eyes narrowed. "You lie poorly, human." He activated his communicator. "Commander, we've captured a human saboteur. Evidence suggests he's not working alone." A harsh voice responded from the communicator. "Bring him to Central Command. We'll extract the information." Miles felt a cold knot of fear form in his stomach as the soldiers roughly pulled him away from the console. Extraction didn't sound pleasant. As they marched him through the corridors, Miles took careful note of the Zentari positions and numbers. There were more than he'd hoped, but fewer than he'd feared. Perhaps 24 soldiers in total, spread throughout the station's main areas. They seemed to be concentrating on securing the command center and communication systems. When they reached Central Command, Miles was pushed roughly into a chair. A tall Zentari in more elaborate armor turned from the main control console to examine him. Based on the deference shown by the other soldiers, this had to be Commander Varric. "This is the saboteur?" Varric asked, his voice laced with contempt. "A maintenance worker? He has been interfering with station systems, Commander," reported the soldier. "And we believe he's working with someone else." Varric approached Miles, looming over him menacingly. "Who else is on this station? Where are they hiding?" Miles met the commander's gaze steadily. "Like I told your men, I'm alone." Everyone else evacuated. Varric's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Humans always believe they can lie successfully to superior beings. It would be amusing if it weren't so pathetic. He gestured to one of his officers. Prepare the neural extractor. A soldier approached with a device that looked disturbingly like a metal crown with inward-facing spikes. Miles instinctively recoiled. This process can be painless, Varric said smoothly. If you cooperate, tell us who else is on the station and where they are hiding, and we can dispense with the extractor. Miles glanced at his timekeeper. 15 minutes until the Eldrani arrived. He just needed to hold out. There's no one else, he repeated firmly. Just me. The janitor they forgot to evacuate. Varric sighed dramatically. Very well. We'll do this the difficult way. He nodded to the soldier holding the neural extractor. Just as the device was about to be placed on Miles's head, the station's emergency sirens blared to life, accompanied by flashing red lights. A mechanical voice announced, "Warning! Fire suppression system activated in Central Command. Evacuate immediately." Before the Zentari could react, white foam began spraying from ceiling nozzles, quickly filling the room. The soldiers scrambled in confusion, slipping on the rapidly accumulating foam. Miles took advantage of the chaos to kick away from his captors, sliding across the foam-slick floor toward the exit. He crashed into a Zentari soldier, sending them both sprawling. In the confusion, he managed to grab the soldier's sidearm before scrambling to his feet and running for the door. The corridor outside was similarly flooded with suppression foam, making pursuit difficult. Miles navigated the slippery conditions with the practiced ease of someone who had cleaned up similar messes countless times. Behind him, he could hear Varric shouting orders to his disoriented troops. Miles ducked into a maintenance access point and quickly made his way into the tunnel system. He needed to find Lirithel and formulate a new plan. After navigating several junctions, he heard a soft sound ahead. Raising the stolen Zentari weapon cautiously, he called out, "Lirithel." "Miles." Her voice came back, filled with relief. "You escaped." He rounded a corner to find her waiting in a small junction node. Her skin patterns pulsed with bright intensity when she saw him. "Nice trick with the fire suppression system," Miles said, lowering the weapon. "I observed how you accessed the environmental controls," she explained. It seemed the logical way to create a distraction. She had the weapon in his hand. "You're armed." "Borrowed it during the confusion," Miles replied. "Not that I really know how to use it. It may still prove useful." Lirithel checked her device. 12 minutes until my people arrive. We need to prevent the Zentari from securing the station's defense systems before then." Miles nodded. "They're concentrating their forces in the command center and primary systems hubs. But there's a backdoor access to the defense grid through the maintenance office on level 3. Not many people know about it. It was installed as an emergency override after that system failure last year." "Can you access it?" "My clearance doesn't go that high, but..." Miles grinned. "I cleaned the security chief's office. He's got a bad habit of writing passwords on adhesive notes. Not the most security-conscious guy." Lirithel's eyes widened. "That is remarkably careless." "People don't think janitors pay attention," Miles shrugged. "Their mistake." They made their way through the maintenance tunnels to level 3. As they crawled, Miles could hear the sounds of Zentari soldiers searching the main corridors, their footsteps and harsh voices echoing through the walls. The maintenance office was a small, cluttered room filled with spare parts, tools, and several terminals. Miles went straight to the chief's desk and began searching for the password he'd seen during his cleaning rounds. "Here," he said triumphantly, pulling a note from under the keyboard. Typical. His daughter's name and birth year. Miles logged into the system and navigated to the defense grid controls. "I can't shut down their ships or anything, but I can activate the station's passive defenses, emergency bulkheads, security lockdowns, that sort of thing." "Do it," Lirithel urged, keeping watch at the door. "Anything to slow their progress." Miles initiated the emergency lockdown protocol, sealing off sections of the station with heavy bulkheads. On the security feed, They could see Zentari soldiers suddenly trapped in corridors and rooms, pounding futilely on the reinforced doors. That should keep them busy, Miles said with satisfaction. He checked his timekeeper. 7 minutes to go. Lirithel placed a hand on his shoulder. You've done well, Miles Harper. Few beings would show such courage in the face of an enemy like the Zentari. Miles felt his face warm at the praise. Just trying to stay alive. And keep Earth from being invaded, I guess. Both worthy goals, Lirithel said with a smile. Her expression then grew serious. But we're not safe yet. Varric will. The door to the maintenance office suddenly exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments. Miles and Lirithel were thrown backward by the blast. Through the smoke and debris, Commander Varric stepped into the room, flanked by 4 soldiers. Found you, Varric growled, his yellow eyes fixing on Miles. And your accomplice? His gaze shifted to Lirithel, narrowing suspiciously. You are not human. What are you? Lirithel rose to her feet with regal dignity, her skin patterns glowing defiantly. I am none of your concern, Zentari. Varric's expression changed from suspicion to shock as he studied her more carefully. Those markings, impossible. The Eldrani do not interfere in military actions. We do when those actions threaten species under our protection, Lirithel replied coldly. Varric's shock quickly transformed into cruel amusement. An Eldrani spy, so far from home. The High Council will be interested to learn of your interference. He gestured to his soldiers. Secure them both. The human for interrogation, the Eldrani for leverage. As the soldiers moved forward, Miles raised the stolen weapon. His hands were shaking. He never fired a gun of any kind before, but he kept it pointed at Varric. Stay back, he warned. Varric laughed. You don't even know how to disengage the safety, human. Miles glanced down at the weapon in confusion, and in that moment of distraction, one of the soldiers lunged forward, knocking the gun from his hands. Another grabbed Lirithel, securing her arms behind her back. A valiant effort, Varric said condescendingly, but ultimately futile, like all human resistance. He checked a device on his wrist. Our reinforcements will arrive shortly, and then the real invasion begins. This station will make an excellent forward operating base. Miles struggled against the soldier restraining him, his mind racing for another plan. They just needed a few more minutes. Your invasion is already doomed, Lirithel said calmly. The Eldrani High Council is aware of your intentions. Even now, a response fleet approaches. Varric scoffed. A transparent bluff. The Eldrani are observers, not warriors. You lack the will to intervene directly. Perhaps in the past, Lirithel conceded. But policies can change when sufficient evidence presents itself. What evidence? Varric demanded. Lirithel's gaze flicked briefly to Miles. That some species are worth protecting. Varric followed her gaze, then laughed harshly. This janitor? This is your evidence of humanity's worth? A lowly maintenance worker? A maintenance worker who shared his last food with someone he believed to be beneath his station, Lirithel replied quietly. Something no Zentari would ever consider. Compassion is weakness, Varric sneered. A failing the Zentari eliminated generations ago. Is it weakness? Lirithel challenged. Or is it the greatest strength? The ability to see value in all life, not just those who can serve your immediate purpose. Varric waved dismissively. Philosophical debates are a luxury of the soft-minded. The universe belongs to those with the strength to take it. He turned to his soldiers. Prepare them for transport to the command ship. Suddenly, the station shuddered violently. Emergency alarms blared as the lights flickered. What was that? Varric demanded. One of his officers checked a handheld device. Unknown vessels have entered the sector, Commander. They're not responding to identification requests. The Eldrani, Lirithel said, a note of triumph in her voice. Right on schedule. Varric's expression darkened with rage. Impossible. The Eldrani would never commit military forces without. He was interrupted by another, more powerful shudder that rocked the station. The lights went out completely for several seconds before emergency power engaged. Commander, called an urgent voice over Varric's communicator. We're under attack. Multiple Eldrani warships have engaged our fleet. They're demanding immediate surrender and withdrawal from the sector. Varric's face contorted with fury. He grabbed Lirithel by the throat. What have you done? The Eldrani have never directly intervened in regional conflicts. Despite his grip, Lirithel remained composed. As I said, policies can change when presented with sufficient evidence. Another violent tremor shook the station. The officer's voice came through again, now tinged with panic. Commander, our ships are being disabled systematically. The Eldrani technology it's beyond anything in our database. We can't penetrate their shields, and their weapons are bypassing ours. Varric released Lirithel and turned to his communications officer. Order all forces to fall back to defensive positions. We will not surrender. Miles, still restrained by a Zentari soldier, caught Lirithel's eye. She gave him a subtle nod, then closed her eyes in concentration. The patterns beneath her skin began to pulse with increasing intensity, cycling through colors Miles hadn't seen before. The soldier holding Lirithel suddenly staggered backward, releasing her as if burned. Commander, the prisoner is doing something. Varric whirled back toward Lirithel, raising his weapon. Stop whatever you're. He never finished the sentence. A blinding flash of blue-white light filled the room, forcing Miles to squeeze his eyes shut. When he opened them again, 6 tall figures stood in a semicircle around them. They resembled Lirithel but were clad in sleek, luminescent armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. Their skin patterns glowed with synchronized pulses. The Zentari soldiers raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the new arrivals simply gestured, and the weapons flew from their hands, clattering against the far wall. By the authority of the Eldrani Conclave, announced one of the armored figures, you are ordered to stand down and withdraw all forces from this station and sector. Varric stood defiant, though Miles could see fear in his glowing eyes. The Zentari Dominion does not recognize Eldrani authority in this region. We have legitimate claim to. Your claims are rejected, interrupted the Eldrani warrior. This system and its inhabitants are now under Eldrani protection. Lirithel stepped forward, and immediately the Eldrani warriors bowed their heads in respect. Commander Varric, you have 2 choices. Withdraw peacefully or be forcibly removed. The Conclave has spoken. For a tense moment, Varric seemed to consider resistance. Then, with a snarl of defeat, he tapped his communicator. All forces, fall back to extraction points. Prepare for immediate withdrawal. The soldier restraining Miles released him and stepped back. Miles rubbed his sore wrists, hardly believing what was happening. One of the Eldrani warriors approached Lirithel. Your Majesty, are you unharmed? The council has been greatly concerned. I am well, Commander Thaler, Lirithel assured him. Thanks in large part to this human. She gestured to Miles. The Eldrani commander turned to Miles, studying him with obvious curiosity. This is the one you mentioned in your transmission? The maintenance worker? This is Miles Harper, Lirithel said, her voice carrying a note of respect that made Miles stand a little straighter. Without his assistance, I would have been captured or killed, and the Zentari invasion would have proceeded unchallenged. Commander Thaler inclined his head toward Miles. Then humanity and the Eldrani Conclave owe you a debt of gratitude, Miles Harper. Miles felt distinctly out of his depth. I just did what anyone would do, he said awkwardly. That is where you are wrong, Lirithel said softly. What you did, sharing your food, risking your life to help someone you believe to be a simple service worker, these are not universal traits. They are distinctly human virtues, and they are rare and precious in this galaxy. Over the next hour, the station transformed from a battleground to a secure facility once more. The Eldrani efficiently escorted the Zentari forces off the station and back to their vessels. Through the observation windows, Miles watched as the sleek Zentari ships retreated, surrounded by the much more elegant and somehow more imposing Eldrani vessels. In the main conference room, now repurposed as a command center, Lirithel stood with her military advisors, reviewing security measures and diplomatic protocols. Miles hung back, feeling out of place among the regal Eldrani officers with their glowing skin patterns and fluid movements. When the immediate crisis had been addressed, Lirithel dismissed her advisors and approached Miles. "Your station will be secure until your people return," she assured him. "And the Zentari will not threaten Earth again. The Eldrani Conclave is formally extending protection status to humanity and all human colonies." Miles shook his head in amazement. All because a janitor shared his lunch. Lirithel smiled. "Sometimes the smallest gestures reveal the greatest truths. You showed me what I needed to know about humanity, that even those your society overlooks can demonstrate remarkable compassion and courage." "So what happens now?" Miles asked. "Now, we establish formal diplomatic relations between our peoples." Lirithel's expression became thoughtful. "The Eldrani have observed humanity for generations, but always from a distance. It's time we met as equals." "Equals?" Miles laughed softly. "Your people just sent the Zentari running with their tails between their legs using technology we can't even understand." "I'm not sure equals is the right word. Technology is not the measure of a species' worth," Lirithel said firmly. "Compassion, creativity, resilience, these are the true markers of a civilization's potential. In these, humanity has shown itself to be exceptional." A young Eldrani officer approached and bowed respectfully to Lirithel. "Your Majesty, the Council is requesting your return. The diplomatic delegation is prepared to remain and establish relations with the human authorities." Lirithel nodded. "Thank you, Varian. I'll be ready shortly." As the officer withdrew, she turned back to Miles. "It seems my time here is coming to an end." Miles felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Back to being the queen, huh? No more crawling through maintenance tunnels." "Perhaps not those specific tunnels," Lirithel said with a smile. "But I suspect my adventures are far from over." She studied him for a moment. "What about you, Miles Harper? What will you do when your people return to the station?" Miles hadn't thought that far ahead. "Go back to pushing my mop, I guess. Someone's got to clean up all this mess." Lirithel's expression grew serious. "If I may offer a suggestion, your knowledge of station systems and your quick thinking under pressure suggest you're capable of much more than maintenance duties." "Are you offering me a job?" Miles asked, only half joking. In a manner of speaking, Lirithel replied. "The new Eldrani embassy on this station will require a human liaison, someone who understands both the technical aspects of the facility and possesses the qualities we most admire in your species." Miles stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to be a diplomat? I'm a janitor." "You are the man who shared his last food with a stranger," Lirithel corrected him. "The man who risked his life to protect not just his own species, but the principles of compassion and dignity. I can think of no better representative." Before Miles could respond, the station's communication system activated. A human voice, the first he'd heard in days, announced, "Attention Station 47. This is Admiral Chun of the Alliance Fleet. We are approaching your position and preparing to dock. Please respond." Lirithel smiled. "It seems your people have returned. Consider my offer, Miles Harper. The universe is changing, and those who see value in all beings, regardless of their station, will be essential in what is to come." She extended her hand, a very human gesture, and Miles took it, feeling the slight vibration of energy beneath her skin. "Whatever you decide," she said softly, "know that you have earned the highest respect of the Eldrani Conclave. When others speak of humanity in our council chambers, they will speak of the janitor who shared his last meal with a queen disguised as a maid, and in doing so, changed the course of galactic history." 3 months later, Miles stood in the newly constructed Eldrani embassy, straightening his diplomatic uniform. The insignia on his collar, a stylized broom crossed with an Eldrani glyph for bridge builder, had been Lirithel's idea, a reminder of where he had come from and what he had accomplished. Through the embassy windows, he could see the station bustling with activity. News of the Eldrani alliance had transformed Station 47 from a minor diplomatic outpost to a central hub for interspecies relations. Representatives from a dozen worlds now walked its corridors, all eager to understand the species that had earned the legendary Eldrani's protection and respect. Miles's comlink chimed, indicating an incoming transmission. He activated the holographic display, and Lirithel's image appeared before him, her skin patterns glowing with warm familiarity. Ambassador Harper, she greeted him with a smile. How goes the preparation for the trade summit? Everything's on schedule, Your Majesty, Miles replied, still not entirely comfortable with his new title. Though I still think someone with actual diplomatic training would be better at this job. Diplomacy can be taught, Lirithel said dismissively. Character cannot. The delegates from the Trescian Collective were particularly impressed by your practical approach to the resource-sharing protocols. Miles laughed. You mean when I compared interstellar trade regulations to making sure everyone gets their fair share at a potluck dinner? Precisely. You have a gift for making complex issues understandable. A rare talent among diplomats. Lirithel's expression softened. The Council asked me to convey their continued appreciation for your service. The Zentari have formally withdrawn their territorial claims in 3 sectors since our alliance was announced. Just doing my job, Miles said, echoing his words from their first meeting. And doing it exceptionally well. Lirithel paused, her expression becoming more serious. There is another matter I wish to discuss. The Conclave is establishing a new initiative, a cultural exchange program between our peoples. We would like you to help select the first human candidates. Miles raised his eyebrows in surprise. Me? Wouldn't the Alliance Education Ministry be better suited for that? Perhaps for traditional academic criteria, Lirithel conceded. But we're not looking for your brightest scientists or most accomplished scholars, though they are welcome too. We're looking for those who embody the qualities that first drew us to humanity: compassion, adaptability, and the ability to see value in all sentient beings. Miles understood immediately. You want more janitors. People who do the unglamorous work but still maintain their humanity. Lirithel's skin patterns pulsed with approval. Exactly. Those who serve others without expectation of recognition. Those who share their last meal without hesitation. Those who see dignity in every being, regardless of status or appearance. I think I can help with that, Miles said, already considering possibilities. There are good people everywhere, doing small kindnesses every day that no one notices. Until someone does notice, Lirithel reminded him gently. As I noticed you. As they continued discussing the details of the exchange program, Miles reflected on how drastically his life had changed. From an overlooked janitor to an interstellar diplomat, all because he'd shared his food with someone he thought needed it more than he did. The universe, it seemed, sometimes noticed the smallest acts of kindness, and occasionally, those small acts could change the course of history. On his desk sat a framed nutrition bar wrapper, his reminder that even the simplest gesture of compassion could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Beside it lay his old station access card, the word maintenance still clearly visible despite the wear and tear of years of use. He kept them both to remind himself and others of an important truth. Sometimes the most extraordinary people were found in the most ordinary places, doing the most ordinary things with extraordinary kindness. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.